Something Isabel said earlier, just Alexander talked about long-term returns and having a kind of long-term structure, and something Isabel mentioned earlier was around taxes. When we were having a conversation in the green room. For very good reasons, probably, and certainly for good political reasons, there is a sort of clampdown on corporate tax avoidance in Europe and in the West. But you were saying you were concerned about some of the possible unintended consequences of this that could have an impact on investment that you thought hadn't been possibly fully considered.
Sure. Well, there's several dimensions to this. It's all part of the question of how do we transition from a system that's bank-dominated to one that is more on an even keel between banks and markets. And so right now, in a number of countries, and again, this is very often national level legislation, the provision of credit by banks is subject to a completely different legislative and tax regime than provision of credit by funds. And specifically, there's a tax disadvantage, so that doesn't make sense. So that's at the national level. The specific issue that you were referring to now, Steve, is in connection with the OECD's base erosion and profit shifting initiative, which has to do with preventing large multinational companies from avoiding taxes, which is obviously a very worthy goal that is hard to disagree with. But one side effect is that a lot of the cross-border investment funds that are at the heart of the Capital Markets Union initiative are getting caught under that net as being identified as multinational entities and end up being potentially liable to double or triple taxation. And that's obviously at the detriment of the end investor. And ultimately, therefore, will reduce, if it's not addressed, will reduce the flow of funds going into these vehicles and will constrain the growth of the Capital Markets Union. So these are issues that we're trying to put on the radar. I think we're making progress there, but they're very tedious. And there are solutions, but it's a lot of nitty-gritty work to make sure that these unintended side effects are avoided.
A couple of words that Martin brought out and that I think are in terms of what the assessment the Commission is now making on the regulation so far, relating to inconsistencies in regulation past and weaknesses, also a word you used. Obviously, you're kind of looking at them, but I wonder if you or other members of the panel would like to identify any of these issues that you see as something that does need to be addressed, or that would be helpful to address to kind of get the kind of capital markets moving.
Well, we would also like to, it's a good opportunity maybe also to remind everyone that flow of capital is not only something that we need to look at within the European context, and so look in making sure and increase that there won't be that many more barriers to the free flow of capital in Europe, but that Europe is interconnected, and that we have to also take the global perspective into account. So making sure that institutional investors from abroad can continue to invest in Europe, yes, but also institutional investors here in Europe need to be able to invest in the best possible fund managers, for example, outside Europe. And that is sometimes we feel forgotten in that context. And here, as for our industry, AIFMD is the relevant file, and it's now being discussed what a third country marketing passport could look like. So a passport for non-EU managers that want to raise funds here in Europe. So our members, pension funds, insurance companies also from Europe wanting to invest, for example, in US fund managers, it's not as easy for them. They need to comply, to every, right now they cannot even comply with AIFMD, and that needs to be also shaped in a way that, again, institutional investors from Europe can continue to access these managers, these investment opportunities outside of Europe. So taking into account the global perspective, we believe is really important, and it would be a shame if Europe, rather than tries to build up borders around itself in order to, to accommodate the EU managers. I think that's not the right approach because it can ultimately also fire back. And so keeping so not taking CMU almost global and thinking more in a global perspective is one element where we are discussing, and we are hopeful that this will be also taken into account.
If I may just add, I think the call for evidence is an important initiative under CMU, and I'm curious to see what the outcome will be. But I think that after all these regulatory initiatives, we have to review certain inconsistencies which are still existing. Just as one example, when we talk about consumer information or protection, if you look at the information requirements under UCITS, under MiFID, under PRIPS, they are, to some surprise, not the same, although it's the same client at the end of the day who receives that information. And I personally don't believe that more information provides you with really more, or let's say more numbers provide you with more information and clarify things. So I think there are topics, issues to be clarified, but I think we are on a good way. The progress is there, and as I said earlier, I think the whole attitude has changed with regard to really the stakeholders in these regulatory initiatives. So I'm less concerned that we would not really improve with regard to these inconsistencies. And I don't want to go back to the second panel because we don't want to talk about banks.
No, we don't want to talk about banks. Martin, without sort of giving us a long litany and anticipating this, and I know the process is ongoing, but are there any things you could quickly identify for us that you think, okay, this stands out, and we probably need to act in this area?
No, I'm afraid it's too early. The consultation closed at the end of January, so we are now analyzing the 300 plus responses that we received, with a lot of claims made by the industry in particular. So we are looking at the responses. We are reflecting. If you want my personal view, an obvious area indeed is investor protection. We've done a lot over the last few years in order to have more consistency between the various sectorial legislation to deliver comparable information and the same level of protection to consumers, but more can be done probably. I think I would accept that. Another example that springs to my mind, but again, I speak personally here, is the fact that we have to make sure that our banking rules and the new rules that are being developed in Basel, be it on the leverage ratio or on the trading book, are conducive to a resilient and effective market-based finance. So we have to make sure that, repo markets and market-making activities and central clearing, for example, can continue as they should, whilst, of course, continuing to de-risk the banking sector where needed. So there are some balances here that need to be looked at. But again, these are not at all Commission or DG FISMA conclusions. These will come in a couple of months where we have finalized our examination of the responses.
I just want to draw this to a close very soon. There was an interesting discussion I was involved in last night about the differences between a single rule and a single rule book and the question and the extent to which they're the same thing. But I did want to just raise here on the day that David Cameron comes to Brussels and tries to renegotiate or finalize his renegotiation of a British deal with the other 27 leaders. what you think might be at stake here and whether and how significant, the British are, if you like, and what they bring to the capital markets and to the financial markets in Europe, whether would be a significant issue if the British were to leave. Isabel, do you have an observation thereon?
I guess I'll just repeat what I told you last night, which is that the way we look at it, the UK is a provider of financial services to the rest of the European Union. That's what you can learn from looking at the trade balance, right? So, and it's a highly efficient, high quality provider of financial services, and it would be greatly prejudicial to the rest of the European Union if it were to lose this ready access to this great pool of financial services.
Okay, well, I think Judith is egging me on, and I would just like to thank all the panelists for, I hope what you found is an interesting discussion, and to pass the floor on to Judith. Thank you very much.